Welcome back to my channel. My name is Felicia and I'm really excited to share with you guys my new plant. I already have one of these plants in my collection, but when I saw this one in the store, there was no way I could leave the store without that plant. Let me show it to you. Isn't she a beauty? I mean, there's no way you can deny that this plant is gorgeous. So beautiful. The scientific name for this plant is the Bocarnia recurvata, and we're just gonna call her Ponytail Palm because that's what everyone knows her as. So this is what she looks like, and I'm actually going to go ahead and remove my ZZ plant because there's a lot going on in my background and I really want you to focus on the plant. So here she is, my Ponytail Palm. Sometimes this plant is also referred to as the elephant's foot plant. One thing to note about this plant, it's actually not a palm, it's not in the palm family, and it's also not necessarily a tree. It's actually in the succulent agave family. Who knew? I'm actually going to repot this plant. I purchased it from Whole Foods here in Jersey, and again, like I said before, when I saw this plant, there was no way I could leave without it because it is so gorgeous. It already has like a nice size to it, and as you can see, the leaves are pretty long and curly. And the fun thing about the Ponytail Palm is that you can't help but touch it when you see it. I just think it's such a beautiful plant, and I'm so glad that I got my hands on it. Now, before I start the repotting process, I do want to show you my existing Ponytail Palm. Let me grab that. So this is what my current Ponytail Palm looks like, and this plant actually grew quite a bit. I got this plant in December 2020, so I've had it for almost about 1.5 years now. It has grown so much. It has a pretty small trunk here at the bottom, if you can see. Let me lift up the leaves a little bit. The trunk is pretty small on this one, but I've noticed I would say last couple months, this plant has been giving me a lot of brown leaves. Hopefully you can see that there. And as you guys know, brown and yellow leaves, it could be a result of overwatering or underwatering. I really don't know what it is with this plant, but I think I may repot this plant as well off camera just to give it some room. As you can see, I have it in a pretty small plant pot. I would say this is probably about a 6-inch pot. I may bump it on up to an 8-inch pot because with the Ponytail Palms, if you keep them in a small size pot, they're not gonna grow much. If you do want them to grow, you wanna put them in a larger pot, not too big, but something just a little bit larger to give the roots room to grow. So that's what I'm gonna do with this plant here. Another reason why I wanna repot this plant is because of the soil mixture that they've used. It's actually not really a mixture, it's more of, it almost looks like peat moss. And with each of my house plants, just about all of them, I like to use a combination of regular potting soil of your choice. I also like to include some orchid bark as well as perlite. And as you guys know, or maybe you don't know, perlite is good for aeration, and it also helps to allow the water to drain out of your soil easily. So now that we got that out the way, so here's the size of this pot. I would say this is probably about a 10-inch pot. I have a couple of decorative clay pots in front of me. Another thing about my plants, I like to keep them in nursery pots and then I would put them in a decorative pot. It's just my preference. Sometimes I like to change out the pots because I have a ton of pots at home. But I think with this one, I'm just gonna pot it directly into one of my clay pots. So the first option I have here is this pot. It doesn't really say the size, but my guess is this is probably about an 8-inch pot. I'm horrible with guessing the pot sizes, I'm not even gonna lie. So this one appears to be about the same size as this one. It actually looks a lot smaller now that I look at it. So we're not gonna use this one. The second option I have is this pot. This one has to be about 12 inches. This one is definitely a lot deeper than this pot, so I'm gonna go with this one. And this one has a drainage hole at the bottom. And again, because it is a clay pot, it is gonna help soak up some of that water, so I won't have to worry about my new Ponytail Palm potentially suffering from root rot. So let's get started. So here is the plant outside of the little plastic nursery pot. And I'm just looking at the drainage holes and you can kind of see the roots already poking out. Hopefully you can see that. You see that little white bit there? That is the roots. So yeah, I think the size pot that it's going into would be the perfect size. And as I mentioned, the soil that they use for this is not really the right soil for this. Again, you really want to use soil that would allow the water to drain freely out of this pot. Now, I bought this plant, technically I bought it, I want to say I've had it for about 3 days now. I did use a moisture meter to see, or to try to attempt to see when was the last time they watered this pot, and it's at a 1. I also used the old-fashioned method. I stuck my finger in the soil and it was dry. So it is due for a good watering. The one thing about ponytail palms, and I would say the good thing about these plants, is you don't have to water it very often. I would say my current ponytail palm, I water that one about once a month. And I mean, it was doing fine before, but now it has the brown leaves again. I don't know if it's over or underwatered, but I'm pretty much going to stick to the same method with this one. And the cool thing about these plants, and the reason why you don't need to water it as much as some of your other plants, is because it stores a lot of the water in the base of this really thick trunk. Hopefully you can see it there. So again, you don't want to overwater this plant because it stores the water whenever it needs it, it has it. So I'm going to go ahead and take the soil out of this plant off camera, and I'll be back to give you a look at the roots. I've gotten the plant out of the nursery pot, and I just wanted to give you a quick look at the roots before I start to loosen the soil. So this is what it looks like, and the soil is actually pretty damp, so I may not water it as much as I originally intended to, but here's a look at the roots. I wouldn't classify this as root bound, but it can definitely stand to use a larger pot. That's one benefit of transferring your plant from the soil that it came with from the nursery or the big box store to your own mixture, because you can get a good look at what the root system looks like. Now, you don't always have to repot your plant as soon as you bring it home. I don't do it with every single plant I purchase. In fact, I have a plant now. I purchased it maybe a year ago, and I have yet to repot it just because it's doing perfectly fine in the soil that it came in. But with this particular plant and other plants, because you want to make sure they're in a well-draining mix, and this plant is just too beautiful to take the risk. I wanted to put it in my own mixture so that I know if it does well, it was a result of my mixture. If it doesn't do well, maybe I need to change my method. So here we have it. Here is my plant here without the soil that it came in. I'm just gonna plop it inside of this pot for now so I can get my new soil mixture ready. So as I said before, I use regular potting mix. I use a combination of potting mix, orchid bark, and perlite. So here is what that all looks like. Here's the potting mix that I use. And I'm not married to the Miracle Grow brand, but just because it's easiest for me to get, that's what I do. And then I also use some orchid bark, and then of course my perlite. So I'm just gonna go ahead and mix all three of them up. Usually I like to pre-mix this stuff, but I'm just gonna pre-mix. Oh, by the way, I decided not to pot it up directly into the pot just because I'm a girl that likes my nursery pots, because I like to switch out my decorative pots. So I'm gonna go ahead and use this large nursery pot that I got from Home Depot. This is a 2.6 gallon pot. Perfect size for this plant. All right, so I'm gonna mix this up. And as I'm mixing this, let's talk about the care requirements for the ponytail palm. These plants, as I mentioned before, you want to make sure that your potting mix is well draining. You do not want them to sit in water at all because, of course, you don't want your ponytail palm to suffer root rot. We don't want any of our plants to suffer root rot, right? But, I mean, especially this guy. This guy's so gorgeous. So make sure you have a well-draining potting soil mix, and it doesn't have to be what I'm using. Use whatever works for you. I know a lot of people prefer to use organic mixes, worm castings, all of that stuff. Use whatever works for you. As far as watering, we kind of covered that earlier, but again, with watering, I typically water this plant about once a month, which is usually about enough for this plant. Again, do whatever works for you. When it comes to lighting, these plants love direct sunlight. They absolutely love it. Now, because right now it's springtime, I don't have a ton of natural sunlight throughout the day. I have some, but not a lot. And I also have grow lights that I use at night. So what I can do is at the end of the video, and if I remember, I'll show you what my grow light setup looks like for this and really all of my plants. So I'm just here mixing up my mix here. I'm gonna add a little bit more perlite. So far it's looking pretty good. I said a little bit more perlite and it dumped almost half the bag, whoops. All right, so just mixing it up. And I'll show you guys what this looks like in a bit. I just wanna try to mix it up as much as I can. So this is what my mixture is looking like. As you can see, you see the perlite, of course the soil, and then I have my orchid bark in there. I'm gonna dump out about half of this. I purposely put a lot in here just so I can kind of mix everything up, but I'm gonna dump out half of this and place the plant inside and then finish up this project. All right, so let's see. Just gonna put this in to measure what we're looking like to see if I need to, oh no, this is actually perfect. Love it, love it, love it. Okay. All right, now that I got my plant in here, I'm trying to center it as much as possible, and I feel like it looks pretty centered. So now I'm just going to backfill. So I'm just going to add just a smidge more soil because once you pack the soil down, sometimes, you know, obviously the plant will sink down. When you water it, the plant will sink even further. So I just want to make sure that I have enough soil in my plant. I am officially done repotting this plant. As I mentioned, I decided to put it in a nursery pot just because, you know, I'm a creature of habit. So this is the nursery pot that I put it in. Again, it has, let me see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, about 6 drainage holes at the bottom. I don't want to tip it over because the dirt would fall out all the way. That is all. I believe I covered the basics of the care tips. We talked about water, we talked about soil, we talked about lighting. One other thing that I didn't mention before, these plants are susceptible to getting brown tips, so that's just something that's going to happen with this plant and many other plants. If it's something that you don't particularly care for, you can easily just snip it off. You will find that a lot of the brown leaves will occur at the bottom, so those are just old leaves. You can easily, they're really easy to prune. If they're really brown, you can just simply just break it off, or you can just get some shears and snip it. And then again, as far as the brown tips, you can snip that off as well. Let me actually show you what the brown tips look like on my original ponytail palm. So here's the first one that I own. So let me get a little closer there. You see those brown tips at the bottom? Once they're like fully brown like this, you can just easily just pull them off just like that. And then here's another one where it's like half, it goes from like brown to yellow to green. So I'm gonna take some time with this one. I'm gonna work on this one off camera, and I'll keep you guys posted on how this one develops. I'm seeing some new growth here in the center, so I think this plant just needs a bigger pot, as you can see here. So here's the pot in this new home. I know you're probably thinking, what the heck is going on here? But this doesn't bother me. Again, the reason why I like to use nursery pots is because you can transfer it from pot to pot. If you have any questions, please leave them below for me in the comments. If not, I hope to see you in my next video. Bye.